Everyone has experienced a moment like this. A small word, a careless tone, a look that quietly says, "You are not important." Many people ignore these moments. They tell themselves it is not worth the trouble. They say it is better to stay calm, better to avoid conflict, better to pretend nothing happened. But there is a quiet danger in ignoring disrespect. Because when someone learns that they can treat you without respect, they rarely stop. Instead, they learn something else. They learn that nothing will happen if they continue. This is an old story from a farm where animals believed one gentle creature would tolerate anything. Until one day someone showed him something he had never understood before. On a wide farm surrounded by fields lived a tall draft horse named Calder. Calder pulled the farmer's plow every spring. He carried heavy carts of grain in autumn and stood patiently in the barn through long winter nights. He was strong enough to move almost anything on the farm. But Calder was known for something else. He was quiet. When the goats pushed past him in the barn doorway, he stepped aside. When the pigs stole hay from his feeding pile, he simply moved to another corner. When the younger horses nudged him away from the water trough, he waited until they finished. Most animals believed this meant Calder was kind, and he was. But kindness without boundaries can become something else. It can become permission. Near the barn lived a loud rooster named Flint. Flint believed the farm belonged to him. Every morning he shouted from the fence posts. He chased chickens across the yard and often strutted around the barn as if he commanded every animal there. One day Flint hopped onto Calder's feed bucket and scattered grain across the dirt. "Too slow again," the rooster laughed. Calder lowered his head and quietly ate what remained. Flint watched carefully. He was waiting to see if anything would stop him. Nothing happened. The next day, Flint returned. This time he kicked straw into Calder's water bucket. Again, Calder ignored him. Soon Flint made a habit of it. Sometimes he pecked Calder's legs. Sometimes he crowed loudly beside his ear, just to startle him. Each time Calder stayed silent. He told himself it was easier that way. At least that is what he believed. But the farm was watching. And animals learn quickly, especially when the lesson repeats itself every day. The pigs began pushing into his stall. The goats climbed onto the hay he gathered. Even a young donkey once shoved him aside at the trough. Calder endured it all, and slowly the farm learned something. They learned the biggest animal there would never resist. The largest animal in the barn would never respond. One afternoon, a new horse arrived at the farm. She was older, with dark fur and steady eyes. The farmer called her Myra. Myra had worked on many farms before. She noticed things quickly. On her first evening in the barn, she watched Flint hop onto Calder's feeding pile again. The rooster kicked grain into the straw and laughed. Calder quietly began gathering what he could. Myra observed the scene without speaking. The next morning, the same thing happened. Flint strutted into Calder's stall and scattered the feed again. This time, Myra stepped forward. "Why do you allow that?" she asked. Calder looked up. "It does not matter," he said calmly. "It is only grain." Myra shook her head. "It is not the grain." Calder frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Before answering, Myra walked to the center of the barn where the animals gathered around the feeding bins. She picked up a heavy wooden bucket with her teeth and dropped it loudly in front of the rooster. The noise startled Flint, who flapped backward in surprise. "Move it," Myra said. The rooster blinked. "What?" "The bucket," she repeated. Flint pecked at it. It did not move. He pushed harder. Still nothing. Finally, he stepped back, annoyed. "I cannot move it," he snapped. Myra nodded. "Of course not." Then she turned and nudged the bucket lightly with her shoulder. It rolled across the barn floor. The animals watched. Something simple had just become clear to them. Myra looked back at Flint. "You did not kick this bucket," she said calmly, "because you knew it would not move." The barn fell quiet. Even the pigs and goats stopped moving for a moment. Then she turned toward Calder. "And that is why he kicks your grain." The meaning settled slowly across the animals. Calder stood still. Flint shifted uncomfortably. Mira continued. "Disrespect grows where nothing pushes back." Her voice was calm. But the moment something stops moving, everything changes. That afternoon, Flint returned to Calder's stall. He hopped toward the grain bucket with the same careless grin. But this time, Calder did not step aside. He simply stood over the feed. When Flint kicked forward, his claw struck Calder's hoof. The rooster stumbled backward. Calder lowered his head slightly, not in anger, only enough to show the space was no longer open. "I eat first," Calder said quietly. Flint hesitated. Then he stepped away. No fight happened. No shouting filled the barn. But every animal watching understood what had changed. The quiet horse was no longer the easiest place to push. In the days that followed, something new appeared in the barn. The pigs stopped stealing Calder's hay. The goats stopped climbing onto his stall. The donkey waited his turn at the trough. Calder had not become cruel. He had not become loud. He had simply stopped teaching the farm that he would accept anything. And that small change was enough. Many people believe ignoring disrespect keeps life peaceful. But silence can quietly invite more of what you wish would stop. When someone learns they can treat you without respect, they often repeat it. Not always because they are cruel, but because nothing shows them otherwise. Respect begins the moment you stop allowing yourself to be treated like something that can be pushed aside. Kindness is not weakness, but kindness without boundaries rarely earns respect. And once you understand that, the world around you begins to change. Because people quickly recognize when someone finally respects themselves. Respect rarely appears where it is never required. But the moment you calmly protect your place, others begin to see your worth differently. Not because you became harder or colder, but because you finally showed that your dignity is not something anyone can simply push aside. Sometimes all it takes is standing still, just once, to show others who you truly are. If this story made you think about your own life, pause for a moment and ask yourself something simple. Where have you been stepping aside when you should simply stand? Share this story with someone who might need that reminder today. And stay with us for more stories that reveal the quiet truths hidden inside everyday life. Remember, respect often begins with one quiet moment when you finally stop stepping aside. Sometimes the smallest boundary is the one that changes everything.